Hello, friends and colleagues. Welcome to this special collection of reflections from our Reframe for Resilience podcast. What you're about to hear are brief, powerful moments from our guests. These are leaders, change agents, and everyday people who have faced challenges, asked hard questions, and chosen growth. In the circle of inclusion, we are reminded that inclusion isn't just about being present. It's about being seen, heard, and valued. These stories ask us to consider who's truly listening, and how do we hold space for voices that have too often been overlooked. In equity, in leadership and education, our guests challenge the idea that fairness means sameness. They invite us to recognize that not everyone starts at the same place, and that true leadership removes barriers so that everyone has the chance to thrive. In Growth Through Reflection, we hear how adversity, uncertainty, and even pain can become pathways to transformation. These are not stories of perfection, but of honesty, courage, and the willingness to reframe the moment in order to lead from a place of purpose. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own story and how your challenges might carry the seeds of your own strength. And if something resonates, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs encouragement. Start a conversation. Be the person who creates space for inclusion, equity, and growth. That's how we begin to reframe for resilience. Not just for ourselves, but for others.
Long time, and she looked back very earnestly and very sincerely, and without a bit of malice in her, she said, "Yeah, you're not being an asshole." And going to the small things, I've always thought I was pretty good at compartmentalization. I didn't think the stresses of work came home with me. And so that was a giant realization where I was like, I've always been a bit loyal, maybe even to a fault. So it's like, I kind of realized it's like, who have I been loyal to in that journey? Because it's not who I meant to be loyal to, or at the expense of who I would have chosen if I would have looked through it that way, through that lens, through the way it was affecting my life outside of my work hours.
And thanks for sharing that. What struck me about that is that your wife clearly knew that you were in a place where you could accept her honest comment. And so she gave you an honest comment that got your attention. And I think that says an awful lot about the relationship between you and your wife.
It took a lot of courage to make such a choice. And so partly growing up as a result, I grew up in quite a traditional household, mother, father, traditional values, risk averse, because they'd taken a big risk to come to the UK, didn't want to take any more risk, so quite a risk averse upbringing, where stability was valued over lots of other things. And so working in Shell, which was also about stability to a large extent, not as risk-taking as some other organisations given what's at stake. Working at Shell felt safe, felt comfortable, because it was almost an extension of my upbringing, working in that kind of environment. And so working at Richmond, where there is more risk taking, took me a little bit of time to adjust to. Probably more time than I anticipated initially. And then one day I realized, oh wow, I can just do this, whatever this was. I can just do this.
That experience and that journey of self-discovery, that clearly has really impacted your life generally. What's the one principle, if you like, you would say you have learned with respect to being resilient? How does that contribute to being resilient?
Well, I think there's this concept that that I've read about in the past. Is an author named Taleb. It's the same guy who wrote Black Swan.
Yes.
The concept is anti-fragility. I think for me, the idea, we talk so much about resilience in the world today, businesses being resilient, people being resilient, and resilience is simply absorbing a blow and bouncing back to your original state. Anti-fragility is the idea of absorbing that blow and coming back stronger and better because of that pain that you endured. And so I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that the pain of our past, the challenges that we've had, all of those things have led you to this moment, and they've all built character, and they've built a toughness within you that you probably don't even recognize in yourself.
In elementary school and high school, I was bullied, and like a lot of kids back then. And the owner was, I would say, toxic, but it was in 1988. So back then, you just work and you shut your mouth, sorry for my words, and you work. And I decided, because it was making crying people, the other employees, the other part-time student like me. So I decided, talk to me, I will talk to them. And what I use to be resilient is I use a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. And I used to be more fixed mindset. It is what it is and that's it. But now I realize that, no, I'm gonna learn from that, bounce back and go forward. And it's important to remember your value. I mean, whatever happens, it's temporary.
No, I like that. As a matter of fact, I was thinking, my mother used to tell me when I was a kid that she would say, always remember, people can do what they want to do to you, when they want, how they want, but never for as long as they would like. And it was a way of her saying to me, no matter what the problem is, it never lasts forever.
I start with the advice your mother gave you. Everything is temporary.
Well, number one, control the controllables. Number two, I would say ultimately seek to understand, whether that is understanding your own reaction or understanding why this is happening. And then third, I would say knowing when to ask for help is also very, very key, because you're never going to be able to do it all. And there's only so many hours in a day, and burnout is a very real thing. So, being mindful of the time that you have to achieve something and taking, quote unquote, inventory of the team that you have to lean in on a bit. Make sure that you're paying attention of when you are not necessarily being the greatest at raising your hand and saying like, hey, I actually am overwhelmed by the volume of tasks or the hardness of the task. I'm not thinking of the appropriate word that I want to use here.
It is. I think it's one lesson I learned early on, right, is you think early on what makes a great leader, what makes yourself a great leader is you're the be all end all, right? If you leave, everything falls apart. And really from some of the great leaders I worked with and going down through history is what makes a great leader is the teams they build and the leaders that they help develop to become leaders themselves and even go on to greater things. And boy, that's really one of the best pieces, is when you help or you play a part in someone, be successful and move on to bigger and better things. Again, maybe not with you in the same job with the same employer, but it's a great feeling to really see people grow and spread their wings, and just give people the opportunity. Again, just be fair and consistent, and give everyone the opportunity to make the most of themselves.
Since last night, my last patient of the evening, booked her appointment. She was my last appointment. And I asked her, I said, "Hey, how you doing tonight?" And she's like, "Dr. Evers, can I be honest?" And she's like, "I've got a bunch of crap going on." And so I told her, I said, "Just start from the top. I'm listening. I'm here with you. Just let me hear it all." And I said, "We'll make a plan together." And I think listening is a really important skill that I have developed over the last few years, and really not just listening to document, but listening to understand, listening to hear the concerns, listening to hear the hesitations and the frustrations, to be able to create and craft a plan for my patient that isn't overarchingly trying to tell them what to do, but to let them know, hey, I'm your partner. I've gone to medical school, I've done residency, I've done fellowship. I'm here to provide you sound guidance with your health. And so, for instance, with that patient last night, I ended up spending about 40 minutes with her. By the end of the call, she felt so much better. And she was so thankful for the care that I was able to provide her.
I think the biggest thing was that after being with Disney for 20 years, thinking that it was the end of the road for me, what am I going to do now? I think looking inside and saying to yourself, and really looking at what you've done in the past, and say, you know what, I got through X, Y, and Z. I can get through this. I think part of it is being brave to take on something new, to be bold enough to just do it, and honest with yourself. Honesty with, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix it? And, like I always said, I told you, I think in our first time we spoke, I always said that faith, trust, and pixie dust, right?
If something resonates, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs encouragement. Start a conversation. Be the person who creates space for inclusion, equity, and growth. That's how we begin to reframe for resilience, not just for ourselves, but for others.